So you and I were throwing out some ideas for the Friday hot topic for the Friday hot tag. And one of the discussions we've been having, we actually had a really lively discussion in a group chat with yourself and me and the rest of the Bearded Trio, Gary Horn and Dr. Rob Stinson. We were talking about this UWN Prime Time Live and obviously partnership with the NWA. We're all super excited about it. We haven't heard a lot. There's a lot of people asking for information, for price to match cards and to what we can expect and things like that, which is normal because we're all a little antsy. It's been a while since we've had some NWA programming. And so there's a lot of questions, but one of the discussions that we got into was this idea of what's going to, in our opinion, what's going to move the needle for this being a weekly pay-per-view, which obviously means you got to pay to view, right? If my understanding of pay-per-view is correct. And so, one of the things that they have to look at, one of the aspects is going to be, how do they sell this thing? They've already, come out and said Nick Aldis is involved, Tim Storm's involved, some of these headliners, Aaron Stevens, the national champion, things like that. But we were actually in the discussion of, okay, well, outside of typical NWA and UWN and championship wrestling talent, what are some ideas of people that we could see thrown into the mix that would really move the needle and kind of sell those pay-per-views? Because I do think from a business standpoint, they got to be looking at it from, okay, how can we really make a splash? How can we sell this thing like from the get-go? And, I have to believe that first episode is just going to be an absolute banger of a card because they're going to want to get all eyes on that first episode and, to continue to sell week after week. And so we threw out some names and we had, like I said, a lively discussion, but I wanted to bring it to the Friday hot tag and just ask, when I say to you, I say, okay, take all of the current NWA and UWN talent off the table. If they were going to introduce somebody into the mix that you think is going to sell pay-per-views, someone who's available, what's your gut reaction to that question? Who should they bring in?
Well, like you said, man, nothing at this pay-per-view is or will be should be pedestrian, right? Nothing they do can just be, oh, that's okay. Oh, that was cool. No, they need to kick the damn door in. And, when you're asking for our hard-earned money, I mean, we need to be wowed. We need to be blown away. We've heard a lot of rumors, and so I'm going to go with the speculation of one guy. And this is nothing that I'm saying has been confirmed by anyone up in the hierarchy, and the same thing with Will. These are just our guesses. But the one guy who, we were all hoping would come to the NWA and ended up appearing in Impact Wrestling was EC3. And we were all hoping EC3, Ethan Carter III, would be a part of the NWA, and then he chose Impact, which, again, understood. But then it was revealed, the spoilers, the dirt sheets, whatever you want to call it, says, well, his contract allows him to work multiple wrestling promotions. So he's actually appearing in Ring of Honor. Well, it would make sense to this guy if we see someone of the caliber EC3 show up in the NWA. Of course, him showing up in Ring of Honor is going to have a lot of people scratching their head, and a challenge to our world's heavyweight champion, Nick Aldis, could be just what it would take to kick the damn door open. You can't see me, but I just kicked the door open. And I think EC3 might be the guy.
I agree, man. EC3 checks all those boxes. Obviously your mind first goes to, as much as we're not WWE fans, we all agree that they have the highest visibility, they have the highest name recognition. And so he checks all the boxes for the fact that he is a former WWE talent. He has made a name for himself on social media since being released. He's now appearing in two of the top, non-mainstream promotions in Impact and Ring of Honor. Having him appear also on UWN Prime Time Live would really be par for the course, and that would be somebody that, as I said, checks all those boxes and has that visibility level that could really bring some eyeballs. I mean, you're hitting all those promotions where he's appearing now, the previous promotions, and all of his past work and stuff like that. So that's a great name, and that's one that is definitely at the top of my list. I have some personal preferences, and the first personal preference, this would get me to buy, I don't know if this is more of a popular opinion or not, but I've been adamant since his release from WWE back in April that I want to see Joe Hennig and Nick Aldis fight for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. I just think that would be an incredible match. I want to see Joe Hennig out of this Curtis Axel gimmick that WWE kind of had him strangleholded in, because I think he's capable of so much more. And so every time I think about that, again, that's just for me to move the needle. Like at that point, I see Joe Hennig on the card. I'm opening my wallet. Like that's a done deal. I don't know if that's going to be as widespread as an EC3, as you mentioned. And another name that we were throwing around too, kind of in line with EC3, was Rusev, who's now Miro. And he's been kind of full-time on Twitch and streaming and things like that, and he's even come out and said that he's done with wrestling, at least for now. But I mean, that's a name that, if you saw, hey, UWN, NWA, they're partnered up, they're doing this thing, week one, Rusev's on there, they're going to sell a ton of pay-per-views just from that name alone. And we're not, this conversation isn't meant in any way to like degrade the NWA or the UWN. We're just speaking from a business perspective. Like, we're obviously hardcore fans, but when you're going to come out and roll out a pay-per-view weekly model like this, you really do have to go above and beyond to pull in some new audience members to try to sell those pay-per-views. So speaking of Rusev, what are your thoughts on Rusev?
Well, geez, I mean, I think Rusev is the top prize, right? I mean, when we talk about checking the boxes, victories over John Cena, a former U.S. champion for the WWE. I mean, Rusev Day was one of the most over things in the company in the last 5 or 6 years. And the fact that the guy's transformed his look, his appearance, his body. I mean, he's in probably the best shape of his life. He's a guy, look, Nick Aldis even said back in May, that was a guy that he was hoping would land in the NWA. He's a guy he's got it. He's got the moxie. He's got the skills, and he certainly isn't a pushover. One of the things that I think a lot of people might complain about for the opponents that have been lining up for Nick Aldis is, he's always the bigger guy. He's always the stronger guy, and the most times he's the most athletic guy. But putting him in the ring with somebody like Rusev, the Brute, the guy who's just as big, if not bigger, just as fast, if not faster, just as strong, if not stronger. I mean, that's a real challenge to Nick Aldis. And I think with his visibility and the way that the WWE dropped the ball on him, I mean, we're hearing things now that McMahon was saying that these are speculations, these are rumors, but the Rusev Day, when he went to McMahon and said, look, they're chanting my name, McMahon said they're doing that to mock you. But he's saying, hey, my merchandise sold out. They said, well, that's because we don't have enough sizes. It's ridiculous how much WWE dropped the ball with this guy. And knowing that his background, I mean, he trained out here in Southern California with Rikishi and the Knox Pro Academy. I don't know, man. I think it could happen, and I think it should happen. I think it will happen.
I think he's got the ability, man. And I think, for a lot of us, we've only seen him in WWE, and there's kind of this disconnect because we view, the NWA and UWN as this different brand or different style of wrestling, which it is. It's a more pure, traditional style of pro wrestling that you and I enjoy. We haven't really seen Rusev in that environment. But in my mind, just from what I know about him, his character, his in-ring work, like you said, his athleticism, the fact that he's gotten himself into the shape he's in now, and he's taken acting classes, like he went the extra mile for the wrestling industry, only to get crapped on back in April and released after years of being, underutilized. But I think he's got all the necessary traits and talents to come into an environment like the NWA and succeed. I think he could have a great feud with Nick Aldis. He could have a great feud, for the national title or something like that. I think we've seen him at that mid-card spot so long, like, I think we're all ready to see him main event, and so as weird as that would be for him to just come in and instantly be there, that would be cool to see, and I think he'd fit in well. Speaking of, Nick Aldis and championship feuds, the other thing that we were going to talk about is, speculating over the fact that obviously Nick Aldis is going to be involved early on, hopefully in episode 1 of Prime Time Live on September 15th, Tuesday. So what are our thoughts? What are your thoughts on potential first opponents? Because it's no secret that everybody wants a shot at that title, right? That is the prize. It's the ultimate grand prize in professional wrestling. And so everybody's going to want a shot at that. But what makes the most sense creatively? What makes the most sense from a storyline perspective? How do you kick into that first episode and have a meaningful feud with Nick Aldis and someone else? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, nothing can be pedestrian. This has to be grab you right by the shirt and drag you into it, because if it's anything less than that, I don't know if someone's going to put down their whatever amount it's going to be to watch this pay-per-view. It needs to be able to grab you right in from the very get-go. So I think it's got to be somebody who's an established name. Now, again, we don't know who's available out there, right? I mean, guys in AEW are mostly locked up, but then you see names like Brian Cage is working independent shows in Texas. I mean, he's going to be at the same event that Nick Aldis will be on the 29th. You know that John Moxley, who is a full-time AEW wrestler, still honors commitments with New Japan Pro Wrestling. So we don't really know who is available, but it's got to be someone that's going to, like I said, just drag you right into it. I mean, in a perfect world, the first match is Cody Rhodes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
But I don't think that's going to happen because of the commitments with AEW. But could you imagine? I mean, if all of a sudden you see a poster that says Cody Rhodes, Nick Aldis, United Wrestling Network, pay-per-view, primetime live, I'm in. I don't care what the dollar amount is, I'm in. But realistically, I don't think that's an option. So then you start looking at other guys who would make sense. Somebody like a Davey Boy Smith Jr., the aforementioned Rusev. God, help me out. I'm running out of names here. I'm drawing blanks.
Well, Brian Pillman Jr. was one that I had brought up as well, just the name recognition. Right. You know, Marquez has mentioned over and over, when we talked to him the night that the announcement was made, he specifically mentioned MLW. I don't know that they've reached any kind of partnership, but, Brian Pillman Jr. is under contract with MLW, but has appeared on AEW in the last 2 months. So we know that that's a possibility, and that would be a really cool feud. And Brian Pillman Jr. even appeared on Carneyland. He was on the Eli Drake show. So we know there's some synergies here. There's some connection between the NWA and Brian Pillman Jr. So that would be another name that I feel like, the recognition's not going to be as high as Rusev. But for those of us, especially like you and I, who are kind of lifelong wrestling fans, we knew his dad when he was wrestling, and there's a lot of credibility just because of his name. Same with Joe Hennig for me, Mr. Perfect's son, Little Perfect, or whatever you want to call him. But that kind of legacy really will draw numbers, in my opinion, especially from the fan group that's, diehard wrestling fans.
Another name that is a possibility, just because of the connections. And again, don't know contract status, so this is speculation. But, Carl the Machine Gun Anderson was discovered by David Marquez. He was brought into then NWA Pro Wrestling, where he got his start, was able to win the NWA tag team titles before going to New Japan Pro Wrestling and becoming one of the most dominant tag team wrestlers in New Japan history. He had his time in the WWE, again, winning the tag titles like he does, and now he and Gallows are both in Impact. But we don't know what those contracts look like, and if there's an opportunity for the Machine Gun, Carl the Machine Gun Anderson, to wind up in United Wrestling Network's Primetime Live, again, he would be a guy who I think could have a hell of a match with Nick Aldis. And, we're running out of time in terms of promos, but the promos that those two could give, I think, would be money in the bank. Pardon the pun.
Absolutely. When I think of, as we were talking about with feuds with Nick Aldis, when I think about internal, right, so people that are already a part of the NWA, the name that kept coming up in discussions we were having and things like that was Eli Drake. And, that would be a common sense, like a logical thing to happen. But, I think we talked about this in our discussion as well, but that just seems like something that needs to headline an NWA pay-per-view. It seems like something that doesn't need to be, and I don't mean this to sound this way, but it doesn't need to be taken so lightly that it's part of a program that's not an NWA specific pro. Does that make sense? Like this is a partnership, and yes, they want to sell views, but to me that seems like something that has been building up for years on Power, and they would want to pay that off on NWA show.
I agree with you to an extent. I think, number one, I love Eli Drake. And if there's anybody who could rival Nick Aldis, it's Eli Drake. And for that reason alone, I don't want that to be the first match on the pay-per-view. I don't want that to be the first title defense. But a build to that, I think, could really drive the NWA Power when it comes back. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't have interactions here on Prime Time Live. It doesn't even mean that they can't square off on Prime Time Live, but I don't think that's the match that you start the show off with. I don't think that's the first headline. And that's not to discredit Eli Drake, but I think there's a lot more mileage out of building this storyline between those two. Because, I mean, if you look at them on paper, they're practically the same guy. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Sorry, I had to throw that Eli Drake button in there. But if you look at those guys, I mean, both of them are former Impact champions. Both of them have this great look. Both of them, for whatever reason, the opportunity in WWE never materialized. And both of them cut killer promos, again, have great work ethic, are killer in the ring. And a match between those two, I really think, is going to be a hallmark for the NWA down the road. But again, we don't want to do anything pedestrian, and I don't think the United Wrestling Network plans on doing anything pedestrian. I think this first match really, like I said, has to kick down the door. And I'm not trying to disvalue Eli Drake, but I think there's a lot more mileage with a storyline and a series of matches that leads up to a pay-per-view.
True, and also not forgetting, I know it's been a while, but Eli Drake is one half of the NWA Tag Champs right now. So I would imagine that they're going to hit the ground running with that. And speaking of that, we focused a lot on Aldis and singles competitors, but one of the things that would, man, if they could work it out, I think would sell a lot of pay-per-view buys is if they could work out James Storm and Eli Drake versus FTR. They've had some beef over some podcast and some Twitter feud and stuff like that. I mean, that is a crossover. Again, they check all the boxes. Former WWE, current AEW, former WWE Tag Champs. Great, that throwback in-ring style, which really, really fits the mold for NWA. So if they could make that match happen, let me tell you, I'd open up my wallet and your wallet at the same time. That's how much, I'd come get your money and pay for that. So,
and I think the thing is, right, so we keep speculating on what match they have to put together for Nick Aldis. But let's be honest, if they could get FTR versus Eli Drake and James Storm for those NWA tag team titles, you are onto something. And it's not just my wallet, it's not just your wallet, it's the collective wallet of the fans watching. And if we could see the FTR, the guys who were akin to the throwback era, the horsemen, if you will, the mid-Atlantic territories, if you can get those two guys in a match for the NWA tag team titles, I mean, doesn't that just feel right? And I'm not saying let's put the belts on the guys, but couldn't you see those guys holding those beautiful golden belts? Couldn't you see those guys defending that legacy at the Crockett Cup 2020 or 2021, whenever we get the next one? Just feels so good.
Yeah, absolutely. That could main event the first show. Like, you don't even have to have if you have a tag team event like that, you don't have to have a world title match on that first show. You could save that for show 2 or 3 or 4. Like, you could build to something. But if they can make that happen, man, people be kicking the doors down to watch that show. So anything else outside of talking about all this and now tag teams? Any other ideas for feuds that you have that you think would move the needle?
Well, I mean, moving the needle is subjective, right? So something that would move the needle for me is I want to see the payoff between Murdoch and Aaron Stevens, right? I want to see that match. I want to see we don't know when that next NWA pay-per-view is going to be. We don't know when we're going to see Crockett Cut or anything else, right? I mean, everything's kind of on indefinite hiatus. So to see that match finally come to conclusion, I think would be a lot of fun. And then also, a guy like Watts, the United Wrestling Network Hollywood Heritage Champion, man, I would love to see him mix it up with some of the guys in the NWA. speaking of the aforementioned Trevor Murdoch, or even guys like Aaron Stevens, and I know that he's a champion and Watts is a champion, but I would like to see some of those high-profile guys. We haven't even talked about like Elijah Burke, the Pope, and we don't know what capacity he might have in all this. Again, there's so much that could happen. Tim Storm, for crying out loud. I mean, there's so much moving parts. Zicky Dice with a TV title. There's a lot of compelling matchups that they could put together that don't necessarily require superstar-level names. That would be really good additions to the pay-per-view. But also somebody like Thunder Rosa. Thunder Rosa defending her women's championship, I mean, again, against the right opponent, will definitely move the needle. Definitely. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and I mean, in my mind, the storyline is there, the continuity is there to just go ahead and rerun Thunder Rosa and Allison Kay. I'm buying in for that. No matter that I've seen it twice already, I'll go back third, fourth, fifth, sixth time for that feud, that match. So I mean, there's an easy one, low hanging fruit right there that you throw that on the card, and again, I'm in.
Yeah.
So a lot of directions they can go, man, and we just hope that in the coming days and weeks that we do get some teasers. We do maybe get the hint of some feuds that are starting on social media. That's always fun to watch. And as always, you follow us, and we'll keep you up to date with it. So I am Hey It's Will from This Is the NWA Podcast, and you are
at the Alliance Blog on all social media, baby. We're on TikTok and Twitter, and we're on Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Well, another great Friday, another great conversation. Always a pleasure to talk to you, J. Cal. And we're going to wrap this up. And you can catch us Sunday night at 8 o'clock. We'll be going live on YouTube. J. Cal, stay tuned over to the Alliance Blog with the pre-party on Tuesday at 5 p.m., 2 p.m. Pacific. And, yeah, man, good chat. Any other closing thoughts?
No, let's just get it done, man. Let's see that United Wrestling Network and NWA thrive in cooperation. Thank you. It's easy for me to say.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, thank y'all for joining us. Thank you to the live chat, and we will see you guys next Friday.